Welcome to Booked, where two guys tell you about the books they're reading. I'm Livius Nedden.
And I'm Rob Olson. This will be the last episode of 2020, so we'll probably talk a little bit about that. It's been a long year of really, really good content, but we're going to be reviewing a book tonight, and that book is called The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I'm going to shoot you a little bio really quick about Matt. He is a British author for children and adults. His memoir, Reasons to Stay Alive, was a #1 bestseller, staying in the British top 10 for 46 weeks. His children's book, A Boy Called Christmas, was a runaway hit in his own country and is translated into over 25 languages. It is being made into a film by Studio Canal, and The Guardian called it an instant classic. Neil Gaiman said of his writing, Haig has an empathy for the human condition, the light and dark of it, and he uses the full palette to build his excellent stories. His novels for adults include the award-winning The Radleys and The Humans.
All right, one of the reasons that we're reviewing this book in particular, even though it's a little, for us, it's a little dated, we try to stay a little closer to release date. This is 3 months out, I think, now.
Right.
But we were kind of thinking of doing what we did last year. Was it last year or was it 2 years ago? We tried to figure out what the best book of the year was and see if it is the best book of the year. So this is the Goodreads Choice Award, won the Goodreads Choice Award for Fiction. It's a Good Morning America Book Club pick. It's a New York Times bestseller. And we wanted to test this theory out. Can we really find the best book by listening to, one of these sources? You'll hear where we landed on that a little bit later in the episode. But Rob, there's something you wanted to touch on first, I believe.
Yeah, this is just something that it's not going to be really much of our conversation at all, but our discussion will include the topic of suicide. So if that is something that is something you don't want to hear, something that is sensitive for you, obviously we just want you to be prepared for that before you go on listening. It is a small part of the conversation, but it does come up toward the beginning of the book. It kind of sets the stage. So if that is something that you are just not prepared to hear someone talk about, be warned that we will be talking about that a little bit.
All right. And with that, here is the synopsis. Somewhere out beyond the edge of the universe, there is a library that contains an infinite number of books, each one the story of another reality. One tells the story of your life as it is, along with another book for the other life you could have lived if you had made a different choice at any point in your life. While we all wonder how our lives might have been, what if you had the chance to go to the library and see for yourself? Would any of these other lives truly be better? In The Midnight Library, Matt Haig's enchanting new novel, Nora Seed finds herself faced with this decision. Faced with the possibility of changing her life for a new one, following a different career, undoing old breakups, realizing her dreams of becoming a glaciologist, she must search within herself as she travels through the Midnight Library to decide what is truly fulfilling in life and what makes it worth living in the first place.
Yeah. I guess from a person who I did not read the synopsis before. Did I? I don't think I read the synopsis before I read the book. This is the type of synopsis that will get you to want to read the book, but it is definitely taking some liberties with the actual facts of what happens in the story.
Yeah, I would imagine. So now I will tell you, I did read the synopsis. And I looked it up on Amazon. We were deciding to read this, and my first thought was, and I'm not saying this to be a spoiler, right? But after reading that synopsis, let's try to erase the fact that you read the book. I think you probably come to the same conclusion that I would around how this book is going to end, right? That this is It's a Wonderful Life, right? Type,
yeah.
At the end, that things were actually better for George Bailey by being around. And that's not exactly the situation in this book. But it's hard. I let me just say that I would be very impressed if someone found a way to not do exactly that, to point out that the life you have is the best life, regardless of what you think you're missing out on.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. And that actually, the mechanics of how that I don't think we're going to do a spoiler talk on this, but like this is something spoilerly that I won't go into. But the mechanics of how like that came about was probably what I thought was the most like the best part of the book. But anyway, we are getting way ahead of things if we're going to talk about that right now. So we'll just kick off with how the book starts, and it starts with a young Nora. She is at the library, and she's talking to a librarian named Mrs. Elm, who is like her favorite like librarian. She's just this great woman in her life, and she feels very positive about her. And in the middle of what's going on, a phone call comes through to the library. Mrs. Elm answers the phone, and without saying it, you basically discover that Mrs. Elm has to break the news to Nora at the age of like 14, I believe, that her father has died. So that is kind of like the prelude. I don't think it was the first chapter. I think it was a prelude. But after that, the book goes into Nora as an adult, and her life is not necessarily in a super positive place.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like her life is, it's very average. And when I say average, I mean, not everything's great. She's not living her dream. Most of us probably not living our dream. Not me and Rob, of course, because we get to do this, but the rest of you probably not living your dream. She's having some money issues. She loses her job. A variety of small things like that. She was engaged, but the engagement broke off. And to go back a little bit into her youth, there were a number of things that she had interests in or proficiency in enough that it could have been the path her life took. So I'll take a moment and cover a few of them. At one point, she won, and I don't remember, it was like a couple of region-wide swimming competitions. So there was talk that if she stuck with swimming, she could be an Olympic swimmer. She became a fairly proficient musician, and at one point was even in a band with her brother, who we may talk about later, her brother Joe. There's talk, and it's in the synopsis, about her being a glaciologist because she's very into the environment, and that's one of the suggestions Miss Elm, the librarian, actually makes to her. And here she is in her mid-30s, and she works part-time at a music store, that sells like music instruments. And does a little bit of tutoring. Has one student that she tutors on piano playing via keyboard in her apartment. She has a cat, which is always a bad sign if you're a woman in her 30s. And things generally aren't going very well. As I mentioned, she she loses her job. She actually, through a series of events, loses her one piano student, and then her cat dies.
Yeah, so things are not looking good. And she also, a couple other things that are significant. She was helping her neighbor by picking up their medication or something, and like that person no longer needed her help. And then she bumped into one of her former bandmates who was really bitter about the band breaking up. So it's just like one day full of just like hit after hit of just bad thing happening. Leads her to the decision that no one needs her, and that she's miserable. So, and this is where the suicide discussion is going to happen. She decides to end her life. So she takes a bunch of whatever, and she ends it. She decides to kill herself, and that's where we're kind of transported into the story that we'll probably be spending the most time on. Is she doesn't. The thing that happens after her choosing to die is the story that we told you in the synopsis. So she arrives at this weird, unfamiliar building, and she goes in, and she encounters Mrs. Elm, who explains to her kind of what's going on.
And this is what's going on. It is the reason it's called the Midnight Library is it is perpetually midnight there. But some people, for some reasons, get to explore other paths in life, but through a dynamic that's kind of interesting. It's only through a dynamic of regrets. So it's not like, oh, I wonder, okay, I'd like to explore the life where back in the 80s I ripped off a bunch of other people's software and made some software, and now I'm like the second richest man in the world. Not like that. But Nora, for example, as I mentioned, had a very promising swimming career ahead of her. But at a certain point, she decided she just didn't want to put the work in anymore, essentially. So she gave up on swimming as a sport. So at times in her life, she regrets giving up swimming. So she gets to see what her life would be like if she had not given up swimming in that particular time frame when she was a teenager. But the dynamic works also in a very confusing way for Nora, not so much for us. But the way this works is she is transported to that exact moment, midnight on the day of this event, but with no recollection of what happened. So, how do I say this? She knows she was a great swimmer in high school, and she knows why she gave it up, and she has all the memories of her current life. So that she gave up swimming and went on to do these other things. In that life, she wakes up and she is the Nora that's in the library. So she doesn't remember. She has to figure out that she won, gold medals for swimming and now is a motivational speaker or whatever. Like, she has to suss these things out herself. Without any help of the knowledge that these things have happened to her. I don't know if I did a better job explaining that than how confusing it was for Nora, but
no, that's good. So it plays on like the science that it alludes to it directly kind of refers to is like the idea of multiple universes and the fact that like every time you make a decision, a universe exists for whatever different options of that decision were. So like, if I choose to eat a sandwich or choose not to, there's two universes, one in which I eat the sandwich, one I don't. So that being the case, there are an infinite number of lives basically that she could choose to jump into, depending on what she wants to do. But because it's decision based, that's where the thing that Livius mentioned is the regrets comes up. So basically she's going through a series of, oh man, I wish this was different, like I wish I had done this differently type of decisions, and experiencing different lifetimes based on that. But yeah, like I think one of the more interesting things to read was her kind of getting herself up to speed on it kind of reminded, I was explaining this to somebody and they said, oh, so it's like Quantum Leap. And I'm like, oh yeah, it kind of makes sense, because Scott Bakula would just jump into someone else's life and like have to figure out what was going on and why, and then figure out why he was there to get to a resolution. So this is kind of the similar thing where she's like, oh man, I want to go to the lifetime where I was a successful swimmer, like Livia said, and then she would just show up, but then have to figure out what the hell is going on. So that was kind of the more interesting part of it, because she had to kind of research who she was and what was going on. So that played an interesting part of like we could play along with, because we were all kind of dumb about what was happening. So we got to be with her as she discovered what was happening. I thought that was a pretty decent part of the way that the story was told.
Yeah. So I actually liked the detective work on her part to figure these things out. That was probably my favorite part of the book. So she can continue on in these lives for minutes, hours, days, weeks. But at some point, if she regrets that decision again, she's returned to the Midnight Library. Which is interesting, by the way. I just want to mention that this was the number one book in the time travel section on Amazon when I looked at it. Yeah, which I found a little odd, because I believe this is the exact opposite of time travel.
Yeah, I feel like it's there's zero time is traveled.
Yeah, it's midnight on the day every single time. So I don't. Yeah, there's actually no time travel involved. But yeah, so that's and then she gets to explore other regrets that that she has. And I mean, I don't think we're going to go into a bunch of them are. I mean, from the synopsis and from some of the things that, I maybe said about her youth, you can kind of figure out what these things, what some of these things would be. And then obviously, if you know the dynamics of how it works, the mechanics of it, you'll understand that a lot of these lives do not turn out to be all that great, through her eyes.
Yep. So that's the pattern that begins to form because essentially the structure of the book is she gets to the library. Mrs. Elm explains how the library works. Like basically like you choose the life that you want to see. You get to explore that life, but the goal, the goal of the reason that you're at this library and that you have the opportunity to experience these other lives is you're trying to find the perfect life. So basically, if you find a life that you have zero regrets for, you will just continue being in that life and you'll forget you were ever at the library. It's kind of like what is explained to her. So she's touring all these lives looking for the one that she was supposed to be in. And that's the goal. So the nice thing is we get to see some that are very obviously not lives she wants to be in, and some that are a little bit harder for her to want to give up. But that's the trajectory she's on as she starts kind of experiencing these different lives.
The one other thing that I liked about the book and this way of exploring things is that it's not just her life. So decisions she made has impacted other people around her too. And in some cases, again, without trying to be too spoilery, a life becomes far less desirable because of things that happened to other people because she was in this life. And that I thought was, well, it would have been really easy, I think, for the author to shortcut it and say, all right, everything's the same. Like, okay, well, you weren't dating that guy because this happened, but no big deal. Like that guy just went on to do whatever. Right. But there are impacts because of her decisions on those around her. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. So.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is the right time to talk about it, but like that makes me think about, so like it's easy to apply this formula to your own life and to decide like how things would be different for yourself. That's kind of like the easy thing to look at, but like how would they be different for other people? So if we had never established this podcast 9.5 years ago, how would other people's lives be different? Like I know that through the course of talking to people and networking with people, we have brought people together that would otherwise not know each other. So whether that's a good or a bad thing, who's to say? But even like, so there are always, I guess the thing that I'm getting at is, that is my way of thinking about the decisions that I make to do the things that I do impact people's lives in a way that I can't imagine. And I think that's definitely something that is like pretty well explored, like Livius was saying before.
Yep. So this goes on repeat, basically until there's a resolution at the end of the book.
Yeah, that's it.
I mean, that's fair. Like so, and again, I don't even feel like that's spoilery. I think that if you sat down just with the synopsis and then had a little bit of understanding of the mechanics, you'd be like, oh, okay, I see how this is going to go, and it goes with a couple of surprises. I will say there were a couple of things where I was like, oh, okay, and I don't want to talk about them here because they're spoilery, but I thought, oh, okay, that's kind of clever. I do have one thing that I want to point out, and I'll say, and if you think this is too spoilery, just remove this section. But we get a really solid look at a number of these lives, but then it's made clear that there have been many others that are all kind of like summed up in like one chapter. But with the exception of one of them, this is what I guess this is what bothered me a little bit. With the exception of maybe one of them, she was wildly successful at anything she tried.
Oh, that's funny.
Without saying too much, am I right, though? Just take a second and think about what you know about this book, with the exception of the first one, basically.
So, yes, I see what you're saying. I will say that that wasn't the thing that was conspicuous to me. What was conspicuous was that there was so many things that she had the potential to be awesome at. Like she was like a musician and a swimmer and like interested in like glaciology and stuff like that. There was all these setups for, and I was like, wow, like when I was that age, when I was 14, I was great at like reading books and masturbating. So,
yeah. Well, and look, you went on to do one of those, at least one of those on a regular basis.
Yeah, I could stand it. I could stand to read more books. But so that was the that was the conspicuous thing to me, was that there was like a surprising amount of potential, like really good outcomes. But that I think that is like, that goes hand in hand with the thing that you didn't care for.
Yeah. I yes, it's like the opposite side of that coin. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Yeah. And then I think what I would have liked out of this plot a little better, and listen, the plot's ridiculous as is. So if I'm adding more ridiculous stuff to it, I don't think that, it's really pushing the envelope. I almost would have wanted to see this as like a genie type thing, like you only get 3 chances.
Oh, yeah.
Versus you get essentially an unlimited number of chances to get this right. I think that would have put a little more pressure on the protagonist, and then, through her on us to kind of interpret what she's seeing and the decisions she's making. And when I say decisions, it's not really decisions. She can't really just decide to go back to the library. Like something in her has to break, so to speak. Like she has to experience something that puts her in that position of having a lot of regret.
Yeah.
So again, I thought that was done okay, but yeah, overall, I think it was too sprawling, and I think there was probably a better way to handle this.
Yeah, there wasn't stakes really. In the way that you would want. Like if you said like the genie 3 wishes thing, like there would be stakes, and like there would be more of a impetus to like do the best you can. But the way it was presented to her was like, yeah, just keep doing it till you find the right thing. So I agree with that. Another thing is, one of the themes of this book that is introduced early on, so I don't believe that this is spoilery, is the idea of overcoming regrets. Like she is told at the very beginning of joining or going to the library that like there is a book of regrets that you can look through, and it's a pretty awful experience because you're basically like bombarded with all the things that you feel worse about in life. But apparently as she has gone through some of these experiences, like those regrets kind of fade away. And so I can't really talk too much about it, but like the fact that you can go through a life and erase a regret from your book of regrets early on basically says like it kind of tells you everything you need to know in a way, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I said. I found the end to be predictable from like the 10th page. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of, I was thinking about how hard I was on Anxious People, as far as like it not being a challenging book. Like it kind of just laid everything out. And I thought of an analogy. So I'm the type of person who wants a book to be a puzzle. And there are some people who want a book to be a paint by numbers, where like they tell you what to do to see the picture, whereas like you have to figure out how the pieces fit together to see the picture. And this is absolutely a paint by numbers, and it's not a puzzle. But you know what? Some people like a paint by numbers, and so that's definitely the type of book that this is.
I like that analogy a lot, and I agree with you about this book. And look, I've read books that were predictable. Like, okay, if you read I don't want to say any, if you read most books that are in a series, you wind up kind of with the same, you know what I mean? Like, at the end, the protagonist is going to be okay because there's at least 3 more books at the bottom.
There are things you can count on.
Yeah, I mean, they're some of my favorite book series. The Andrew Vax books. They were detective books, and you know what happens in a detective book? The detective in the end figures out the mystery and then goes on to do another mystery, and like that's okay. In this type of book, yeah, I would have liked to see maybe a few surprises, but ultimately, the message of the book is really good, right? So that's a it's like the literary version of when you find people telling you, listen, stop looking at other people's lives on Instagram, with envy, because all you're seeing is the shiny spots. You know what I mean? And that's kind
Yes.
of what this
Yeah.
book is, right? Like only you're looking at yourself and thinking, well, what if I would have pursued my, whatever, my glaciologist career? Or what if I would have stayed with this fella in this book, Dan, who comes up in all the stories in one way or another, right? But it's kind of the same thing. It's like, look at what you have, look at the good things in your life, like capitalize on the good things in life, on the things that make you feel good, and you're going to wind up with a better life, perhaps a better life than the one in which you become a world-class book reviewer, right? So that's and as a message, I really like that, and I like the way that message was delivered. The problem is, I don't read a book for a message. I read a book for a great story. And I don't think this was that.
Yeah, and it goes into the whole like idea of like not worrying about the things you can't control, because absent a midnight library, you can't change whether you became like an Olympian swimmer or whatever. So like when the focus shifts from like, hey, what did I do wrong, to like, what do I have control of? I think that's kind of like one of the things about this book, which is a good idea. And it took a very magical realism approach to talking about all the things Livius just said, but also kind of the idea of like, hey, worry about the things that you can control, not the things the decisions you made in the past.
Yep. All right, let's pop into wrap ups, I think, yeah.
Yeah, we're very split on this, so I don't think you want to go first. You want me to go? Or we're not split. We're pretty similar. I meant.
Yeah. I thought you were being. I thought you were being. Yeah. Here's how this works for readers. So we use a spreadsheet where we track our scoring, and that's where the synopsis and character descriptions and everything goes. And I know we've talked about it here, but there's 8 categories we score it on from 1 to 10, and then we get an average. The way this works is Rob is always putting together the spreadsheet, and my score is above his. So if I scroll carefully down the screen, I can always do my scores without seeing his. So when we get like really close in numbers, I know that it's independent of. It's not like I looked at his and thought, oh well, yeah, he's probably right that the tone was a 7. You know what I mean? Like I can just go in and do my own scores. This is one of the ones, I think, one of the closest ones we've hit. I gave this the highest points in its narrative. And narrative, by our description, is reflecting on the choice of perspective and tense and its impact on the reader's understanding of the book. As I said, one of the things that I liked the most was Nora's trying to figure out her life, which I feel plays into a little bit of like tense and perspective is probably the best place I could find to put that. And I did give it an 8 for that. My low score was a 5, and that was for pace, and not that it was too fast or that it was too slow. It's that I felt the pace was really all over the place. As a matter of fact, I thought I read the final chapter of this book 3 different times. Well, 2 different times, and the third time it was the final chapter of the book. But the way we got to that like sped up really crazy quick, and then had like this slow petering out ending. So I gave that a 5. Everything else was in the 6s and 7s, mostly 6s. And that gave me a final score of 6.38.
I did not differ much from Livius on this at all. I was looking at our scores, and we scored everything practically identically, except for I went a couple higher on a couple scores, and he went a couple higher on the other ones. I ended up at a 6.5. Here's what I have to say about this book. I think that at a surface level, if someone's just looking for kind of an inspirational uplifting, positive message that's got like a little twist of magical realism to it. But it explores like our flaws and the things that we don't like about ourselves. Because so it's very relatable because everybody's got something they wish they did differently. Everybody's got something about themselves that they think is a flaw. Everybody has the thought that they've let people down. So it's very relatable in the fact that the protagonist is embodying our fears and inadequacies or insecurities. But the message at the end kind of brings us around to like a hopeful thought of like, hey, maybe we don't have to have those types of thoughts. So I get what the author was trying to do. I agree with Livius. The lowest score I gave was for pace, for the exact same fucking reasons. There's like some lives we spend like multiple chapters reading about that she experiences, and then other ones where, like Livius said, there's like 30 of them in one chapter that are basically like bullet pointed. So there's a bit of like a dilation of time that happens from experiencing one thing over another. It also gets pretty repetitious because once you've seen like her go to like 2 or 3 different lives, you know the mechanics of it. So it's not introducing new information other than the subtle nuances of the life that she chose to experience. So that was something that I didn't really care for overall. I didn't really have a part of the book that I thought was like a standout, like good thing. Like Livia said, narrative for him was a high score. Everything for me was 7s and 6s except for pace being a 5. What I will say is I know what the author was getting at. It's just not. I do have maybe some philosophical disagreements, and he definitely used the multiple universes structure idea just as a like a foundation for exploring a thought. So anybody who wants to get into this for the science side of it, don't. You will be disappointed. So overall, it's not a bad book. It's fine. I know what it's trying to do, and I know that there's a lot of people out there who will just enjoy it from a, like I said before, a paint by numbers type of situation. But Livia said this briefly before, and I absolutely agree. There was a lot of potential to take this in some very interesting directions, and the author just didn't seem like they were interested in doing that. They wanted they had a specific message in mind, and they chose to stick to that. And because of that, I think that we were deprived of, possibly some really interesting scenarios, or at least a little deeper or more challenging kind of outcome. So, like I said before, 6.5 from me, combined with Livius's score averaged out, we have a 6.4375 overall score for this book, which, because this is the final book we were reviewing for 2020, we know is one of the lowest scores we've given overall.
So not the best book of 2020.
Yeah, we are at odds with that Goodreads.
I didn't do the math, but I think that's what that means. So, hey, I had a couple other things to touch on that are outside the story. I mean, we're beyond the review, but the Kindle copy, when you get to the end past the last chapter or whatever, has a promo image of a book by him called How to Stop Time. And his memoir was called Reasons to Stay Alive. And I feel like he may have like a certain very specific narrow genre that he plays in just based on these two book titles and then reading this other book.
Yeah, when I saw that in the synopsis, the one that was Reasons to Stay Alive, I was like, this is like a very personal exploration probably for him, which may be explanation for more of the narrow focus that we didn't really care for.
Yeah, and again, there's look, the guy's a best-selling author, so obviously there's a market for it.
Yeah, he didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, I really thought, and it's funny you said paint by numbers, because at one point I thought this is a beach read, which is exactly typically what that is, right? Like a kind of low investment, on your time and your effort to read a book. And again, I'm all for that sometimes, just not this one. Hey, I'm curious. And you said that, he kind of uses the multiple universes thing as just like a plot device. But do you believe that? Do you believe that decisions you make, that there's a physical embodiment of the other decision or other decisions that you could have made?
So I believe in the potential for that to be true. There's enough scientific, potential, as far as as far as science has been able to hypothesize, there are arguments in the favor of that are rooted in reality. I don't believe in it as much as even though it's not proven, I think it's real. So I think it's a valid thought to have, but I don't think it's an actual thing I don't think there's enough to tell us, hey, that's an actual thing that's happening.
Okay. I was curious. I mean, I have not looked at all of the research around this, and I know that some of it's done with molecules and stuff, and I can't buy that there's Olivius that opted not to do the podcast. Like, there's a physical embodiment of a universe that somebody could go into. That's, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I can see from a science standpoint, because they're doing it with whatever, like fucking neurons and atoms and shit, right? And then, we have the, what was that? We talked at length at one point about the, what's it called? The observation principle? Yeah. Where something's being observed, it acts differently.
Yep.
I don't know how much that translates over. I was just curious on what your take on, the way it goes down in this book, minus a library or whatever. So.
Well, if you want my thought right now is it is a potential possibility that doesn't have the supporting evidence. But it is absolutely an amazing theory to explore. And obviously we've even talked about Dark Matter. We reviewed by Blake Crouch, who that's the whole kind of the focal point of how the book works is using a multiple universes kind of idea. So it is a fertile ground for storytelling. Absolutely.
Well, that's okay. And I get that they're two totally different types of book, but that's one that actually did really, really interesting things with the idea, though.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to put spoilers in this episode for that, but man, there's still some scenes from that I think are just fucking brilliant.
It's the gun. It's the sporting goods store, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That is
absolutely. Yeah.
And that's the thing. We read that book at the beginning of, was it this year or last year?
I think it was last year.
Last year. It was Misty chose it for us to read. Mm-hmm. And there are books that either we'll forget altogether that we read that book for the podcast, which is it sounds horrible, but I reminded Livius of a book we read, and he's like, "What are you talking about?" There are other books that either the whole book or chunks from the book are unforgettable. Like if I said, "Hey, what's the main character from Strangest in the Proportions name?" I know Livius is gonna be able to summon that information. But yeah, like that scene from Dark Matter where he goes into the store. Yeah. Without, I don't want to spoil anything, but that's something that was so good that it became an example of in my mind of that's how you do it. So yeah.
Yeah. And again, very, very different type of book. So I didn't expect, that kind of thing from this, but anyway.
Right.
All right. Dude, I think, and I know we're going to do a year in review, but I do think that now would be a good time to remind the listeners of all we've done this year very quickly.
Yeah, we'll do our year in review where we go into a little bit of detail. But one of the facts that I thought was good about this year, actually that was a standout fact of this year, is that we have conducted, with Les Edgerton being the most recent one, 14 author interviews this year, which is easily double any of the other years, except for maybe the first one where we did the Warmed and Bound series of interviews. This is our most interview heavy year I think of the podcast besides the first.
Yeah, and that we did, the same amount of interviews, but in like 2 weeks. So yeah, and we decided, that we're probably never going to do that again.
Yeah, that was, oh my God, and I was anyway. Yeah, that was a big thing. We were actually like in this month kind of worried that we weren't going to hit our reading goal of 10,000 pages a year. Which is, it's a good metric because you could read, if your goal was 52 books, you read a bunch of Hardy Boys books and you're done like in February. So 10,000 pages is a more realistic number of pages. It's an equalizer. It's a more honest kind of metric to shoot for.
Yeah. And I mean, outside of that, we each read books off the podcast, like for our own personal, like not on here too. So yeah, I'm very happy with the results of this year. And just a reminder to you guys, that's how we spent our year, doing this stuff. So you guys have something to listen to every now and then.
Yeah. And for the nerds that just need to know, 34 books. So Midnight Library is our 34th book. The total number of pages is 10,121. And then I read 5 other books outside of the podcast. So 39 books, 11,230 is my personal total. So I feel like that is not shabby, considering on top of that, I have a full-time job. And then I also record and edit and do all of the other stuff for the podcast. So I feel like that's a respectable number.
Oh, for sure. I'm sure. Listen, that puts you in the top 1%. Of people,
which is where I
guarantee it. Yeah, I guarantee.
You read a handful outside of. What did you read outside the podcast? I didn't
keep track. It was 2 or 3 books, so it wasn't 5. I'm pretty sure, but yeah, I didn't keep track. Gotcha. I stopped keeping track of the books I read when I started doing this podcast. I used to have a little notebook. I would write down what I read. At one point, I think because of you, I started writing down what the page counts were. Like I didn't always do that. I would just put the date I finished the book and then the book title and author.
Yep.
They do have. I've considered getting. Have you ever seen a book journal?
I'm aware of them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, it's a Moleskine type journal, and then it has a place for all the pertinent information from the book, and then a place to like write your notes on the book, and then give it like a little rating. I've considered buying one of those and using it for, but I mean, I guess I could just go back and listen to the thousands of hours of audio and it'll tell me what 90% of my books I've read since we've been doing this podcast, what I thought about them.
Oh my God. You want to know how many hours that is?
I mean, we should save some for next week, but if you have it handy.
530 and 33 minutes.
There you go.
So
good Lord.
Jesus. It was a good year. I feel like let's save something for the year in review. I don't want to get too nostalgic about stuff, but we done good.
Yeah, for sure.
What other stuff's going on, sir? What's up with you? Did you have a good Christmas?
I did. And you?
Christmas was in a COVID world. I think I did pretty damn well.
Good. I'm very glad to hear that, as I'm sure our listeners are. Hopefully everybody out there had a good holiday season. We'll call it done at this point, right? All I can tell you is I've been watching these here come the jokes. I've been watching these live cams online. What the fuck are they setting up in Times Square? It looks like they're setting up stages for a New Year's party in Times Square.
Yeah, that's great.
Seems a little weird to me. I figured, because I usually turn that on New Year's Eve, before I go back to watching like a Twilight Zone marathon.
Yeah.
And I thought this year, oh man, if I turn that on, it's going to be a bunch of people like fucking singing on Zoom. Which, by the way, I don't know. I have yet to see anything that's conducted via Zoom that I would consider entertainment, like at all. I've watched like interviews, but you see these things where celebrities are singing, or there's comedians that are trying to do like Zoom comedy concert things.
Yep.
It's brutal. But no, this Earth Cam thing where you can go and My favorite one is Bourbon Street in New Orleans. I'll put that on, see what's going on, and we'll flip through some of them. The fucking Times Square one, dude. They are setting up what legitimately look like stages for musicians.
Yeah. I don't even understand. Like, I try to keep up with what is and isn't allowed and shit like that. But like, so I know that sporting events started out being like, they were like little cutouts of people in stadiums.
Yeah.
I don't know if they can't be back to having like live audiences, can they?
I don't believe they are. It's funny you said that, because I was going to correct you and say sporting goods are when you go buy like sporting stuff, and sporting bads are when you use them.
That's that was good. That was really good. Especially when I use them. Is that what you meant?
I just meant in general. My feelings on sports. I'm not a big sports guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that, and then there's, all right, I'll throw it out there. There is a bear in Transylvania that I've watched probably, I don't know, collectively about 2 hours of. Some crafty Romanian dude. It's available on YouTube. If you Google Romanian bear, just sort by live. It has it by Google. I mean, if you go to YouTube and search, this guy has set up some kind of drum, and I imagine the drum, I'm not sure what's in it, but it's got to be like chicken feed or salt pellets or something. So this bear will come around and like roll the barrel around to get this stuff to fall out of it so he can eat it. And he's got a webcam on it. And he takes donations. And this guy is making some money from doing this. So, but yeah, that's our other favorite one to watch, is the Romanian bear cam, which again sounds like it could be something a lot different than what it is. But it's an actual
that could be
bear,
an entirely
like
different direction. Yeah,
like a black bear.
Well,
I think it's a black bear. I don't know anything about bears.
So it's fun. Your mind went to an entertaining place. My mind went to, we've spent 9.5 years tirelessly reading and talking about books for essentially no money. This guy's like, I've got a barrel and a camera. I'm going to rake in the money. So we might want to reconsider how, like, our loyalty to the craft versus like are we doing we could just find a bear and then get a camera and we're done.
Dude, I got to tell you, there is a absolute market for this kind of weird stuff. The other thing I've been doing a little bit of this past month, quite a bit, but I've been looking at like walking tours on YouTube. So I've been watching some of the Paris Christmas ones because the Champs-Élysées is all lit up and whatever, right? And I don't even follow like the same person. They just keep coming up in my feed and I keep clicking on them. I was like, this video's been up for like 14 hours. It's got like 30,000 views already. And it's literally someone with a GoPro strapped to their chest walking down the fucking street.
Like, not even talking.
Nope. There's no talking. There's no music. There's whatever ambient sounds there are, which is other people talking and cars and stuff. And of course, they're done in places that are desirable to look like. I'll give you an example. I don't think you'll make any money if you leave your apartment right now and go walk down, Route 12. I don't. But so it's always like they're like Venice or Rome or someone walking along the Vienna, whatever the where they got the little boat guys.
Right.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff. And they're raking in thousands and thousands of views because they went for a walk. There doesn't appear to be any editing. You know what I mean? Like it's like someone sits down and reviews the product, right? So they acquire the product and there's a bunch of cuts and there's other clips, B-roll spliced in. Nope. This guy's like, I'm strapping this camera to my chest and walking downtown in whatever city or, and I'm going to upload this to YouTube. And I'm going to make like $3,000 this month from doing it.
Shit, man. So what I'm hearing is you're like, your current thing is watching live cams or cams of things.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
I don't spend hours doing it, but yeah, that's essentially.
So I want you to know, in the last few days, I randomly, for no good reason, fell into, I'm going to watch a bunch of docuseries about cults. So there's a 4-hour, like 4-episode thing on HBO Max about the Heaven's Gate cult.
Okay.
Which I watched.
Do you remember that?
I do.
And you're a little younger than I am. Okay.
That's the thing, because it happened in 1997, the actual suicide. So yeah, that was something that I was the year after I graduated high school. So I absolutely remember that. So I watched that series and it was very interesting. And the thing is, everybody's like, oh, I would never get duped into going into a cult. And yeah, we all could. The one that I'm in the middle of watching right now is there's like a 6-part series on Netflix about the Waco situation, which also happened around the same time, and you know, something that I was there for when it all went down. Not there in Texas, but like there I was alive and I was watching the news and stuff for, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, those two slightly different results, but that's that's kind of interesting. I know there's one, I don't remember what it's called, but there's one that's a much more recent one that I've heard someone talking about probably like a year ago.
Oh, that Nexium like sex cult thing?
That's the one. Yeah, I was going to say it's a sex cult. I was trying to think of what the name was, but yeah, Nexium. That I understand is pretty good. I have not watched it. But since you were talking about Apple TV, I watched yesterday in its entirety. I think it was yesterday. The morning show.
Oh, with Steve Carell?
Yep, with Steve Carell and Jennifer Aniston and the other girl that's always played from Legally Blonde. I can't think of what her name is.
Oh, Witherspoon?
Yes.
Reese?
Was she in that? Yeah, Reese Witherspoon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I watched that. Not bad. It is a look at a like Good Morning America type show that comes up against a like a Me Too moment.
Yeah, I think it was inspired by that MTV guy, right? Like Kurt Loder or whatever. Not Kurt Loder.
Oh, I have no idea who it was inspired by.
I think that at least was that's not the guy I'm
talking
about.
Matt Lauer is the guy I think you're talking about.
Matt Lauer, yeah, absolutely. But
yeah, he wasn't from MTV.
What is he? He was from something.
I think it was. I feel like it was an NBC Today Show. I looked it up. Yep, Today Show, which is I believe an NBC.
Anyway,
thing. But yes, I could see where it was that. I was like, "Oh, MTV, really?" And you threw Matt Lauer right under, or what's his name?
Kurt Loder,
right under a bus.
That guy is
awesome. Kurt Loder.
Please, everybody, just disregard the fact that I accidentally pointed a finger at that dude. That guy was cool. But yeah, I believe from what I heard, it was at least Carell's character, because I haven't seen it, but I think Carell's character was kind of modeled after that, or at least inspired by that.
I could see that. I mean, what little I know of that story, that makes sense, and especially because he was on a morning, like right. I said Good Morning America type show, but yeah, the Today Show was very similar to that.
Yep.
Yeah. So good. I did watch that, and I actually thought that was really well written.
So. I have been hearing everybody talk about on Apple TV it's a show called Ted Lasso. It's about like a guy who's a coach or something like that. It's supposed to be really good. I will be watching that at some point. I just have not gotten around to it yet. So if anybody's listening who's recommended that to me, just cool your fucking jets, man. I got a lot of stuff going on.
There's 3 seasons of that shit already.
Jesus. I got some cults to watch, so it's gonna wait.
The other thing I watch, which I'm probably not going to recommend, is Industry, which is on HBO Max. Which is one of their originals, and it is about I think it's 5 college graduates who are trying to they all land basically a temporary role to prove themselves at like one of the biggest financial institutes. It's a fake place, but it's in London. Yeah. And it's just a bunch of really cutthroat, nasty people
No, it doesn't
that
sound
work
exciting.
in the trading industry. Yeah, I mean, look. I watched the whole thing. I didn't turn it off, but ultimately, I don't know that. I don't know who I would recommend it to. Maybe there's somebody. If some topic comes up, I might go, "Hey, this seems like it might be up your alley." But yeah, not really anything. Nothing there for me, I guess is what I should say.
Well, we're at an interesting point because it's the end of the year, so this is our last episode of 2020. Um, but we do have me and Livius have to look through a kind of a roster of potential stuff we'll be reading in the coming months, and we'll have more to talk about in the future about that. But as far as what's coming next, traditionally around this time of year, we do a year in review. So I believe that's what's going to be happening. That's the next episode you're going to find after this one.
Yep. So until then, please have a happy and safe New Year, and we'll be back with you in 2021, probably about a week from now.
All right. Until then, I'm Rob Olson.
And I'm Livia Snedden. Keep reading.